Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I'm going to start with the emergence of Japan as a world power. Japan before 1871, in the first half of the 19th century, Japan was still an underdeveloped country with an almost medieval social structure. It had a rigid class system with the warlike samurai and their leaders, the shoguns. Holding supreme power, farming, transport, and industry had changed little for the centuries, and the economy was still largely based on bartering rather than money. Even taxes were paid in rice. So, what is bartering is actually the trading of goods without the use of money, exchanging one thing in payment for another. So, I mean, in the beginning, I must say Japan before 1871. You can say that before the start of scramble for Africa, you can say in Asia, there were two powers, Japan and China. Both were struggling a lot. Japan had a very specific structure, and it was structure based on the warlike samurais and their leader, the shoguns. They were engaged in bartering trading style. I mean, they don't need to pay each other, rather than they simply exchange their goods. For instance, if you want rice, okay, you can have rice, and I want in return, in exchange, I would get wheat for that. The Japanese did not welcome foreigners, and they successfully resisted pressure to establish trading rights with other nations. Russia 1804, Britain 1842, and the USA 1853 are all tried to open up the trade with Japan, and all failed. The USA in particular was desperate to find the new market for its rapid expanding industrial output. The American whaling fleet also needed access to Japanese port in order to take in vital supplies, especially coal. Confronted with obstinate resistance, the American finally sent a fleet of warship in 1854. Samurai swords were no match for modern guns, and the Japanese had no alternatives but to open up their borders to trade with the West. According to this paragraph, you can say that Japanese were very obstinate. They were very reluctant to establish their trading ties with European countries. And for instance, Russia, Britain, and USA, they tried their level best to establish good trading relationship with Japan, but they were not able to establish that. But at the end, USA were keen, and he was able to send a fleet of warship in 1854. Obviously, the swords, they didn't have any match for the modern weaponry, and they can't do anything except just to surrender and just to open their trading with West. This posed an enormous risk to Japan, with many backing European merchants had already seized control of the large area of China, imposing their own laws and destroying local culture, fearing that their country would similarly be divided up between competing foreign powers. In 1867, the Japan people demanded the restoration of an emperor as the head of the government instead of the military shoguns. Emperor Muchihito and the Meiji government set about modernizing Japan in order to resist the imperialist power. By 1869, they had established a centralized administration, uniting all the previously independent regions of Japan under one government. According to this paragraph, there was risk. See that, it was a great humiliation for the people of Japan and the government of Shogun. You know why? Because there was that America, they simply came to them, and they not only won the battle, but at the same time they convinced by force the government to establish the trading ties with the USA. So there was a risk, and obviously at the same time, in the neighboring country, China was facing the same problem. There was more than 9 to 10 uh, European colonies in Chinese empire. So the people were seeing couple of events as a very humiliating, especially as I mentioned earlier about how the USA government established trading ties with Japan. Very alarming. So they stood against this traditional type of government, uh, the army, the shogun, the samurais, and they went for the restoration of their empirism. So rapid modernization and military development. the Japanese realized that to maintain their independence, they would have to develop their own military capabilities. This could not be achieved without rapid modernization and industrialization. The Japanese modeled their education system, form of government, army, navy, and industry on those of the foreign nations who presence they most fear. Mines, iron foundries, factories, and shipyards were quickly developed. Some of these were set up by the government and then handed over to private enterprise. What is private enterprise? Business owned and managed by the individuals, free from the government restrictions. Other other were built by former samurai warriors such as Awasaki Yataro, who founded the Mitsubishi shipyards. Railways and telegraph lines were laid to support industrial development and to assist the government with its plans to unify the country. To cover the cost of this swift modernization, Japan concentrated on promoting export trading, especially in textile. So, I mean, this is the way they simply decided. First of all, they restored the emperorship in Japan. First thing. Secondly, they simply try to establish new systems, and they try to copy the systems of the foreign powerful countries. For instance, they had fear. It is possible at that particular moment. It was possible, sorry to say that Britain can occupy a lot of land in Japan. So just to meet the fear, just to counterattack, they decided to establish the uh, same industries. They established to have a modernized country. Just, you can say, follow the footstep of the European successful nations. For that, they established railway tracks. They simply change the policy. They accentuate to construct maximum industries, factories, iron foundries. They work for railways, telegraph, obviously navy. So by fulfilling all those measures, they were able to get on the route of modernization. Increasing prosperity assisted the development of the Japanese military strength. One third of the national budget was spent on the army and navy. Military services became compulsory for all adults male, and by 1894, Japan possessed 28 modern warships. In school, children were taught to be patriotic and to show total obedience to the emperor. The old Shinto religion, which claimed that the emperor was descendant from a god, was revived for the same reason. Modernization helped Japan maintain its independence, and in a remarkably short period of time, it developed from being a country threatened by imperialistic ambitions of other nations to one capable of becoming an imperial power in its own right. So, I mean, we need to understand a couple of things according to this paragraph. I mean, yeah, within 10 to 15 years, I mean, government established new policies, and on um, on the implication of these policies, you can say that they were able. Japanese government was able to become an developed country. There are a couple of measures they were taken, especially, I mean, compulsory one third budget. First of all, one third budget was allocated to the army and navy. One thing, 28 modern warships were established, I mean, for Japan. In school, children were taught to be patriotic, nationalist. Just I mean, they need to practice, they need to go with the training how to use weapons. The Shinto religion, I mean, was restored again, because according to that religion, this is kind of religious perspective. I mean, people were forced just to convince. People were convinced to obey the emperor, because emperor was considered, according to Shinto religion, I mean, the representative of God on earth. So, I mean, all these measures led Japan to become a modern country. The ongoing disintegration of the Chinese empire provided the opportunity for Japan to test its new military strength. Disputes over which country should control Korea led to a short war in 1894. The Japanese army quickly overran Korea, Manchuria, and the part of China itself. When the Chinese capital Peking came under threat, China surrendered by the terms of the Shimonoseki Treaty in 1895. Japan gained Formosa and Port Arthur. Korea was declared independent of Chinese influence. So, I mean, to see, within no time, I mean, there were two things we need to understand. First of all, the integration of Chinese empire. I told you many times before, there was 9 to 10 European colonies in Chinese empire. So just consider a huge empire, and in that empire there are 9 to 10 different colonies were working. So how pathetic the condition of the government was at that particular moment, when they were struggling to meet, just to control or just trying to retain their own lands, though obviously they don't have any chance for that. So on the same footstep, Japan tried to get Korea, and it was a piece of cake for Japan to take over. One thing, then they got Manchuria, then they got Formosa. There are a lot of land Japan was able to cover, to retain, and they got from the Chinese Empire. And Korea was very crucial at that particular moment, but China was so weak that they simply throw each and everything what were demanded by the Japanese government. However, Japan was not only nation with an interest in China. France, Russia, and Germany resented Japanese intrusion into an area where they each had vested interest. Russia wanted control of Port Arthur, since it would provide a warm water ice-free port from which to expand its influence in the Far East. The triple intervention of these three powerful European nations for Japan to hand over control of Port Arthur to Russia. This caused considerably resentment in Japan, which decided to build more warships and wait for the opportunity to gain revenge against the Russians. So, I mean, uh, I told you, Japan was able to get Port Arthur, Formosa, Korea, Manchuria, right? So among all those areas, Russia, Britain, France, Germany, all they had interest in those areas. So especially when we talk about the triple alliance or triple intervention, then we mean by France, Russia, and Germany. They resented, they tried their level best to stop the acquisition of Japanese government into those areas. So as a result, Japan withdrew from Port Arthur, and the Port Arthur was given to Russia, right? So it was kind of resentment for the government of Japan, and obviously for the people of Japan as well. So just to counter all this, they decided to enhance their military power again. The Russo-Japan War, 1904-1905. Russia expansion in the Far East continued. In the 1900s, for example, Russia occupied the whole of Manchuria, which were a couple of years before were the part of Japan. This caused alarm in Britain, which feared that its own Far Eastern interests were under threat. This was one of the reasons why Britain signed the Anglo-Japan Alliance in 1902. The treaty was a major achievement for Japan. It was the first time that the country had been recognized as an equal by one of the major European powers, and the agreement clearly established Japan's emergence on the global stage. In Britain too, the alliance was greeted favorably. See, so I tell you one thing: whenever we skim through history, politics, uh, politics, and especially, we are preparing for the international option. We need to understand one thing, and it is your personal interest. See that sometimes you became perplexed. The way the countries were dealing, they engage with each other for the sake of their personal interest, and it is, believe me, it's like a chess. You're playing chess, having that partner a couple of years before. No, you are going against that partner. No, you're trying to get some new partners for the new. So every single time you are able to change your strategies just for the sake of your personal interest. Same happens. Britain was very keen to restore its supremacy in Far East Asia, especially in China. But the growing influence of Russia in Far East Asia, especially in Port Arthur and in China, alarmed Britain. Britain was keen to had a good relationship with one of the countries who is going to be the power in the future. So they decided to have Japan on their side. So they decided to have an agreement in 1902. There's an Anglo-Japanese alliance, and it is very useful for the both countries. You know why? Because at that particular moment, Britain was able to gain a support of a country which is about to prosper, which is about to be one of the powers in Asia. and especially which can simply counter the policies of Russia in Far East Asia. The first thing, second thing is that, I mean, it was very, you can say, one of the achievements of the Japanese government, because for the very first time, the Japanese government or Japan got recognition by one of the most powerful country in Central Europe, Britain, obviously. Japan now felt strong enough to seek a settlement with Russia. The Japanese were prepared to recognize Russian rights in Manchuria in exchange for Japanese right in Korea. Convinced of their military superiority, that Russian refused to negotiate with the Japanese and instead invaded Korea. The Japanese response was rapid, dramatic, and devastating, and brought Japan into a war with one of the world's greatest power. On 9th February 1904, Japanese warships entered Port Arthur when a number of Russian ships were docked, totally unprepared for a battle. Two Russian battleships and a cruiser were destroyed by Japanese torpedoes. The Russian fleet were widely dispersed around the globe, and the Russian soldiers were forced to endure a overland trip across the Asia to reach Port Arthur and take the arm against the Japanese. So, according to this situation, we can say that after having a settlement, after having a treaty or alliance with the Britain, Japanese got very confident, too that they can do whatever they want to, especially in reference to counter Russia. So, I mean, Russia was very furious at that particular moment, and they simply refused to go for negotiation over Japan. So, Japan was prepared, and they simply sent their troops to Korea and took the control of Port Arthur. Port Arthur at that particular moment, you can say, was the hub, the headquarters of the Russian warships, but they were not prepared, and most of the army, most of the army of the Russia, they were scattered in the Atlantic Ocean, and just to counter-attack the Japanese, they need a lot of time just to be at Port Arthur, and they were not able to reach on time. So as a result, they lost a lot of land, especially the Port Arthur, Manchuria, Formosa, and Macdon. All those crucial areas having a lot of resources, a lot of population, they went to Japan. The Russia's last hope lay with its fleet in the Baltic Sea, but the ship's journey to the Far East was long, tortuous, and eventful. While steaming through the North Sea, the Russian ship mistook some British fishing boats for warship and fired on them. The British were outraged, and for a time, the Russia fleet was pursued by a vastly superior fleet of Britain ships. As Britain was allied to Japan, it seems likely that the rival fleets would engage in battle. While diplomatic negotiations succeeded in preventing this, Britain denied the Russian fleet's access to the Suez Canal, forcing it to far longer route around the Africa, laden down with coal to fuel the steam engines. The Russian ships made slow progress and did not arrive in the Straits of Tsushima between Korea and Japan until May 1905. So it was, you can say, just a couple of things you need to understand. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, most of the Russian warships, they were scattered in Asia. So when they were coming back towards Port Arthur and Korea, I mean, they need to face the Britain Navy, though there wasn't any kind of war or something, you can say, which can disturb Russian army or the Russian fleets. But unfortunately, Russian ships consider the British British trading ships as a warship, so they simply fired on them, and there was a rift between the two countries. Negotiation took place, and at that particular moment, Britain was not ready to give access to the Russian ships to the sea. So by this, Russian have to cover the long distance through Africa to reach Asia, and it was too long for them to be there. So as a result, in 1905, Japan took the complete control in Far East Asia, especially of those lands which were a couple of months before under the control of Russian army. The battle began on 27th May as the Russian and Japan ships finally faced each other in the straits. The slow-moving and the outdated Russian vessels could not compete with the Japanese modern warship, which were under the command of the Admiral Togo. By the following day, Japan had defeated the Russian Navy, facing humiliation abroad and revolution at home. The Russian Tsar Nicholas II signed the Treaty of Portsmouth with Japan. Russian influence in Manchuria was effectively ended and Japan rights over these areas were formally recognized. The space the space of less than 50 years, Japan had developed into the modern industrial country with the military capacity defeating a major European power. Japan entered the 20th century as an imperial nation perceived as the champion of Asia against the Western power. So obviously the power keen to protect and extend their own on trading activities in the Far East, grew increasingly concerned by the Japanese expansion within the region. The concern was heightened by the Japan actions in the First World War. So, I mean, this is I have for all how the Japan emerged as a superpower. This is one of the things we learned through this lecture. And there's a source, a cartoon published in the French magazine Petite Parisine in 1904, according to which you can see that it's Russia, it's Japan, and the Europe are looking towards it. How Japan simply changed its strategy to become an industrial modern power. How they simply through their strategy, through their alliance, through their supremacy, they simply knocked down one of the greatest power in Asia, the Russians. To what extent had Japan become a major world power by 1905? According to this question, you can simply in your answer, you have a lot of references. I mean, the changing of government, restoration of Shinto religion, modern industrialized system, education, patriotism, promotion of patriotism, compulsory army training, railways, warships, a lot of money spent on the budget on navy and military. But why Japan was able to defeat one of the major European power in the Russo-Japanese War? A lot of stuff we can simply put in this answer. Obviously, the alliance with Anglo-Japanese alliance, one major thing. Secondly, the bad strategy of Russian fleets, warships. I mean, the way they were forced to change their route towards Port Arthur, Korea. So we can simply, we have a lot of references we can simply put according to this answer. And source A and opposite in the French illustration from 1904, it shows how other countries looking on the while the champion of Europe, Russia, take on the champion of Asia, Japan. What was the historian learn from this illustration? Obviously, the thing I mentioned a couple of minutes before, it's all about the strategy of Japan. Obviously, it's all about the personal interest, how they simply had different treaties, how they different have establishing different alliance with each other. But according to this, especially, we need to mention only one alliance, which was Anglo Japanese alliance in 1902, which was very crucial at that particular moment. Then we need to understand the Treaty of Portsmouth. It is again very important, which was done in 1905. I mean, it's all I have for today. And after skimming through understanding of this lecture, you people will be able to understand how Japan emerged as a world power, especially a great power in the continent of Asia. So take care and goodbye for today. Thank you.